Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey Tefertiller. Thank you for joining us on another Service Management Leadership podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Kenny Hosey. You see him as Kenneth Hosey. He's an ITIL on LinkedIn. He's an ITIL V3 expert, and he's Director of Service Management at Advent Health. Kenny, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you for having me. Definitely appreciate being the second guest on your podcast here.
Oh my. So there's no pressure, but we both have a lot to live up to at that first podcast with Kat. I think she did marvelously.
Yeah, I messaged her on LinkedIn afterwards. I'm like, yeah, that's going to be a tough follow. So
it will, but I have faith in you. So you're an ITIL V3 expert, just like me. And something that our audience may not know is you, like I, am planning how are we going to make the transition to ITIL 4, right?
Yep.
And do you have immediate plans for that, or is that still somewhat infinite?
Yeah, so I've recently started studying for the transition course to the managing professional. I believe we have 3 individuals who have already underneath me transitioned over to the managing professional. And a lot of new content, really excited about the lean ties, the DevOps ties, everything coming in that space. But as far as how do we fit that into the organization, that's a whole nother ball game. So that's one of the big things is changing the vocabulary we have internally. Talking about how we expand this a little bit more outside the walls of IT. When we were already saying how do we expand this within IT, so that's going to be tough.
You made me chuckle at that because I was using ITIL V3 vernacular with Kat, and I said change management, and she corrects me with change enablement. It was awesome, but it just shows like how far we have to come in this space. And so how did you get started on your ITIL journey? And I asked this question, and I'll probably ask it of a lot of our guests, and here's why. ITIL either, this is my opinion, I'm open for feedback. You disagree? That's great. ITIL either clicks with how you think of IT or it doesn't. Some people see it as a burden, as a bureaucracy. Others see it as, oh, that makes sense. We need to be IT thinking of ourselves as a business service provider. So how'd you get started on your ITIL journey?
Yeah, my path's an interesting one. I worked for years just fixing computers down in the Sarasota, Bradenton area of Florida. So I'd drive house to house fixing computers. So I had a computer knowledge. And then I got into Orlando Health as we moved back here. My wife's family's from here. So as I got hired at Orlando Health on the service desk, we were first introduced into ITIL Foundation. So that was something they encouraged us to learn. So I went ahead and learned ITIL Foundations, and this was about 2010. Then I transitioned over to a system administrator role, doing development and supporting CA Service Desk Manager for the organization. That was our ITSM tool set at the time. And out of that, they were putting leadership through training at the intermediate level at the time. So because they wanted the system admins of this service management tool to be educated on the processes, I got pulled into those meetings. I was very much focused in doing security at the time. I did my bachelor's with a specialization in security, and then I did my master's in digital forensics. So this whole process stuff was just not even on my radar. I was the tech guy. I wanted to go down that path. So ITSM just kind of fell into my lap. ITIL fell into my lap. And as we went through the courses and started talking about all the different connections, I was brought up in this whole environment of siloed IT. You know, we're not working across the board. We're not always having common goals. Sometimes we are, and we pull together. But because of that environment, I never really understood the holistic connection between IT supporting the business early in my career, right? So that was eye-opening for me in the ITIL space. That's really what kind of brought me and said, hey, this is why we do change management. I hear everyone griping about change management meetings, but now I get the reason behind it. I get the driver behind it. So that's really kind of how it came about. I transitioned over to the security team for a short stint at Orlando Health, and then actually went over to Disney doing configuration and asset management. So then it was just kind of deep diving from there into all of the different processes, which we're referring to as practices now. But I'm excited about that part. You know, we being in healthcare, right? We practice medicine in healthcare. You know, now it's time, let's practice and get better at our ITIL practices that we have. So lots of good things, still learning it, to be honest with you. I'm not an expert at it yet, but that's the goal. We want to make sure that we can grow with that and take some of the benefits.
Oh yeah. And so, you know, for me, when I hear you talk about that, it's just how much we all take whatever we've learned from ITIL or IT service management or whatever, because what we learn is separated from how we apply it to the business, is separated from the tool. And I say that because there's a lot of great tools out there of all types for service management, but how we connect with our business stakeholders, how we help them achieve their outcomes, it's a little more difficult, right? You know, the tool set can't do it. And so just this view of ITIL and service management, has that helped you relate and, you know, have those great conversations with your business customers?
Yeah, coming. I've been in a development background before. I've been, like I said, the security space. So as I've been in all these different roles within IT, I've kind of become the tool guy. You know, understanding the tool, pushing the tool, and the value of it. But really, what ITIL helped me do is understand that concept, rules before the tools. You know, that's something I repeat probably too often to my team. We have to have processes. The tool is just there to support and drive what processes we've already defined. And so taking that approach when we work with the business is really important. So as we start to say, hey, we want to build this new thing, rather than saying, hey, we know what's best because we've been there, we know what the tool can do. The tool says it can do this. And, you know, to be fair, salespeople tell us tools can do quite a bit. But with that whole thought process, talking to the business about what do you want to do? My team, anytime we get requests from the business for something new, sometimes it's outlandish and we just have to say pretty immediately, hey, no, we can't do that. But the thing I really push them to strive for is say, no, but what are you trying to get accomplished? How's another way we can help you reach this goal you're reaching for? Rather than something that may have been sold to you or pushed to you. What's another way to do it? So I think that's a little bit different way of, again, still getting that value co-creation, because value just can't come from the business and value just can't come from us in IT. We have to work together and build those relationships.
Yeah, and I'm talking macro here, and then we'll dive a little more micro. But people that have been in, you know, you go see your doctor, you go to the hospital, and people, you know, if we're not in the service management space, we don't realize that hospital can have dozens, hundreds of types of configuration items, from the technology that's in the rooms and, you know, assets and configuration items, you know, and how do we handle changes to those? Because the space is growing to have more technology in the hospital rooms, right? And so I'm not saying that your hospital, your, you know, Advent does this, but that's where it's growing, in my opinion, you know?
Absolutely. The IoT is a huge topic for us right now, biomed equipment. You know, we've kind of built this process internally of how do we start tracking our IT equipment that comes in. We did do a recent session for the ServiceNow Knowledge event, where my boss, James Muir, and I did a presentation talking about how we've stood up our asset management program from a process perspective. And the whole idea is, how do we plug and play other things into that, right? How do we plug in biomed to the same process? How do we plug in IoT to the same process? So that's also something you have to think about strategically as we go through this journey of building out this entire CMDB of what we have. And as we start to get different things in the hospital, even the monitors have internet connectivity and Wi-Fi. You know, we're needing to track anything that stores or transmits data. There's security reasons for it. There's inventory reasons for it. There's a lot of different interconnectivities we need to know about. It's really hard. We're over 50 hospitals now within our system. I want to say over 1,000 locations total when you start taking in all the physician practices. So it's just a massive undertaking trying to understand that infrastructure and what you have. So really important to start with that process and make sure anything new coming in. So I probably dabble more in the asset config space than what a lot of the ITIL practitioners kind of deal with. But it's proven to help me understand a lot of the reasons underneath some of the other stuff. Config management is the backbone to a lot of the practices we're dealing with here.
Oh yeah, and I was even thinking, so in my history, my past or careers, it almost feels like we have separate careers, you know, as we go along. And one of my past one was supporting, it was an MSP supporting some of the hospitality fast food. And so we don't realize that if that monitor that serves the drive-throughs down, you can't use it. And the same as a hospital room, if that monitor, that system that helps the doctors interact with patients for a specific room, if that's down, you can't use that room really, you know, as easily.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of value, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we think about those business services being tied to our application services, right? You know, we have surgical applications that need to be up and running while someone's in surgery. When I was at Disney, you know, your primary driver there and understanding of your CIs and what were the risky changes that could be made. Well, anything to do with the reservation system. There was a known dollar amount that if we fail this change or we bring this system down for X amount of time, we will lose X amount of dollars. When you're talking about healthcare, you can't have that. We would potentially lose X amount of lives. That's just a completely different mindset that we have to deal with in this space. And sometimes it's really tough. We're always trying to understand, you know, how can we better help the patient and you know, make this very patient centric. It's tough to do in IT sometimes. Put yourself into how am I helping the business right now? When you're in the space of healthcare, it's a really easy jump to understand where that all connects together. So that's really one good way that we can help feel value where we are in our current roles.
And I was even thinking how many organizations that I talk to struggle to put $1 per outage, you know. Yeah. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember 5, 6, 7 years ago when a certain airline, their reservation was down for several hours and they lost billions.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have to think in whether service management or IT leadership, we have to think in outcomes, positive and negative, that are for our customers. So what does ITIL, you've answered this a little bit, but ITIL and service management mean to Advent? You mentioned it's a large healthcare system serving multiple states. What does ITIL mean to, and service management mean to the hospital and IT and the business?
The big thing when we came in, when my executive director came in about a little over 5 years ago and was tasked to start the service management office and really start to drive some of these ITIL best practices throughout the organization. The big thing was having support all the way up. You know, our CIO was supportive of this rolling out for the entire company. So having that support was really the primary key to drive things forward. But I think a lot of the drivers behind it were coming from feedback that we got from some audits that we asked to come in to help us understand how can we do better. I think one of those was from Pink Elephant. And so really a lot of the feedback that we got from them was around how we were doing things like change management, configuration management, our incident practices. And at the time, we were really two separate IT organizations. Our Central Florida region had their own IT department, and then the rest of multi-state, as they called it, which included some of the western part of Florida, they would be grouped into that other grouping of what we call multi-state support. So with that, a few years later, we did end up merging everything together. Unfortunately, the Central Florida wasn't within the group that we rolled out ITSM with, so we went through that second round of growing pains there. And we're actually looking at the end of this year also rolling out another more like roadshow or virtual roadshow that we're going to be doing to re-educate everyone on what's changing, what's coming up that's new, what have we done differently process-wise from a tool perspective, and those things like you talked about, change enablement, which we've actually started dropping here and there. That's one of the big things with our transition to Epic here recently. They asked us, what should we call this that we're doing? And we don't want to confuse it with organizational change management. We're really happy to see that that's now more in the ITIL space. But at the same time, how do we keep that apart? Change enablement was a great term to use for us to make sure there's some distinguishing between the two.
And organizational change, no matter how you call it, what you call it, which different practice you use, because there's a bunch out there, I'm always happy to hear stories where people are thinking that, because there are so many that it just gets dropped. And so I could tell stories of when a certain organization would upgrade their ServiceNow version, to the newest one, and it would happen over a weekend, and the only notice the business got was, hey, you can't use the system to put in tickets, versus using it as an opportunity to say, here are your new features, here's how it's going to look different, and I think of the same with people going from on-premise Microsoft Office to O365. The buttons are in different places. Yeah. That's a big deal to some people. And so,
absolutely.
So let's dig a little deeper. What processes or practices, if you will, do you have in place? How mature are they? That sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Our core ITSM processes that we rolled out really were around request, incident. We kind of grouped major incident management into that. Change enablement, change management, whichever you want to refer to it as. Release, problem, our SACM, which I know has been split out, so that would be config and asset management. Continual improvement, knowledge, service catalog management. So those are really the big spaces that we currently have a little bit more matured. I would say out of those, our incident and change process is probably the most mature. Those are things we're looking to figure out some improvements in those spaces, but it's more of when do we do certain activities, and that's more of making sure that everyone's aware of what we're trying to update and when. For instance, when do I create a problem, and after I create a problem, how long do I keep that incident open for? When an incident needs to be fixed by the vendor, how are we affected from an SLA perspective? There's a lot of things that we're looking to fine tune there. Also making it easier when the wrong ticket type is open. How do we get that correct ticket type opened? Or even when someone does want to request standard change to happen, one of the things we've chosen to do is always have that come in as a request, that vetting can occur. We can do approvals if they want or whatever they want to do, but then the standard change would always be created by the application team making that change. That's just something we decided to do internally and from a process perspective, so that we didn't have to build crazy workflows and change that said, hey, sometimes you have these approvals in a standard change, sometimes you don't. It just made more sense. And the big piece out of that is we keep the request open for the customer until the change is complete, and then the request closes. Kind of like that Amazon type of feel. How do you go and purchase something in Amazon? Well, I go and I pick my items, I have an order. That order I track, but I don't care what's going on behind the scenes. I don't need a notification when Jim goes and pulls this item off the shelf and puts it in a box and puts a label on it. Those are things that happen behind the scenes. That's really that customer experience we're trying to strive for.
Yeah, and every company has the freedom to do it differently, right? And that's what's
absolutely
awesome about service management is that it's a framework, it's a toolbox that you can apply in different ways. And that's also why I'm a big believer in calling it a toolbox, because if I need something built in my house, that carpenter or that builder knows how to apply those tools the best. Everybody
Yeah.
has the same tools. It's just how do we incorporate those into what we're doing? So you listed several processes and practices. What's next? What's on the roadmap?
So for future state, we have some event management that goes on today. We just really want to mature that, get a lot more integration. A lot of the future state stuff is just going to be automation. What can we automate and improve? Like I said, I'm a big fan of lean. So understanding where we can go and make some efficiencies in our process, hopefully by automation, that's what we want to focus on. We want to get more agile, getting our stories created. We're kind of spread out on those systems that we use for any of our SDLC activities. Mm-hmm. So when we start to look at, okay, we have multiple instances of Jira, my team is using ServiceNow's Agile module. It doesn't mean we all have to be in one tool set. We just have to have one common set of practices on how do we deploy this stuff? How do we do our releases? How does that integrate with change management? Those are really the things that we want to make some efficiencies for. So having that common set of practices is really important for us. APM, we're actively working on. So we want to build out our application portfolio, really mature that process as well. We have trouble sometimes tracking down who is the owner from a business standpoint of this application, sometimes even the IT custodian, because maybe something was purchased by a hospital that we acquired. So that thing is just from a legacy standpoint sitting around. We still need to know about it. We have to patch it. We need to know the security and be able to communicate to those people who are involved with that application. So stakeholder awareness is really important for us there. And then really just doing some continual improvement, as I mentioned, to our existing processes. Our asset management, our IT asset management and configuration management processes are something that have kind of been at the top of our work list recently. Excuse me. And mainly because we're striving to get what's called High Trust certified as an organization. That's a security framework for healthcare. And so part of that, a lot of that ties into knowing what we have. And we already had this process and practices starting to be built out before we started down this journey, but it's something that we're trying to keep improving upon, trying to build efficiencies for. And like we mentioned to you, where does it stop when you're talking about devices in your organization? We're even having the conversation now, we have this running joke where someone in the organization, we asked them, hey, what's a CI? And their response was anything you want it to be. Well, they're not wrong, right? It's really anything we want it to be, but we have to determine is there value to track things at this level. So we do track consumables, but now we're trying to decide, for instance, as we transition from Cerner to Epic, Epic has some requirements on you for any monitors you have in your organization. It needs to be this size and this screen resolution. Well, how do we run a report on all the monitors in our organization if we haven't been tracking to that level? We treated them more as consumables. They weren't treated as assets. So now we have to make the determination, is the price okay for us to say, we are going to track these things as assets. We need to know where they are at all times from creation to the point we disposition them. So as we go through that, there's a cost to it, right? People have to maintain that. People have to update the data. Does that cost balance out with the cost of just having to blindly go and purchase that many monitors? So interesting topics there. Yeah. Most monitors don't consume or transition data or store data on them from that perspective. So it's like, where's that line that we have to figure out? So configuration management is always going to be fun and asset management.
The one thing about configuration management that I always tell leaders is, to your point, we can call anything a CI that we want, and we can go as granular as you want down, but there's a cost. And so every company, every business, every IT organization has to decide where is the line to where it's worth it. And so I have plenty of stories on that of, even like on a server, you can pull it all the way down to components of that server if it's something you really care about. You know, if
Yeah.
you're an Amazon and you really care about each one of those instances, fine. You know, and that's why I like it being a framework. All
Yeah.
right, you mentioned a lot about healthcare. How is that different than, say, service management and other industries?
Yeah, I would say again that when you start talking about the value drivers and everything, that's going to be where a lot of it changes. You know, I've done some consulting at large satellite companies. You know, I've done worked at Disney for a while. I've been in a lot of different industries in my career, and that's the main difference, right? Knowing what you're supporting and what the mission is behind it, and that's more organizationally than from an ITSM perspective. I would say in the space of IT service management, when we start talking about the different equipment, that's number one. When you try to figure out, you know, how do we build this out so that we can support biomed equipment that, hey, everyone wants to go and let's just scan it with our scanning tools. Wait, you want me to scan a device that's literally hooked up pumping drugs into a person right now? When I scan a storage box, you guys are coming at me saying you brought down my system because you scanned with bad credentials. Well, I'm not going to risk that type of situation. So that's understanding how you're going to go about finding things, understanding what you have in your organization. I would say if you take a look at the compliance aspects of things, where you're looking at, all right, a Disney or something like that, there's still the same type of motivation to get it right within IT. That, you know, I don't think anyone in IT is like, hey, I'm just going to go change this because I don't care if it goes down or not. We all like our jobs, you know. We're trying to stay employed. We want to keep things up and running. So I don't see too much different in that space. But the biggest drivers are going to be where those priorities lie. And the thing that my team always ties back to, we have really these 4 service standards that we go by in our organization. That's make it easy, keep me safe, love me, and own it. So that's not only how we deal with caring for patients, but that's something internally within our team that we also want to kind of underline all of our ITSM practices with, right? Change management, that's keeping our customers safe. You know, we're trying to keep our patients safe throughout the process. We're trying to keep our caregivers safe. As we go into our leadership over ITSM, that love me aspect, this shouldn't be just like, hey, come into work and we're just going to hit you with the whip. We need to do more and more and more. There's a human factor to it, right? The own it, you know, problem management. Who did it? We don't really need to go and throw anyone out of the organization when mistakes are made, but we do have to own those mistakes, figure out how we prevent those from happening again. And, you know, just to make it easy, how do we develop things to be easier? How do we develop our practices and our tools to make it easier for our customers? So those kind of 4 service standards we have probably are the biggest differentiator here than I've seen at some of those other organizations that really just underpin what we're doing in ITSM.
So 24/7/365 also adds a layer, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And makes the change management process interesting. We have a little bit of a unique situation too, where we're part of the Adventist Church, Advent Health, and because of that, they are really big on the Sabbath, which is Saturday for them. So by sundown Friday to sundown Saturday night, we're really not supposed to be doing anything unless it's crucial to support. So where a lot of companies take advantage of the weekends to try to make changes and get things in while there's a little bit less of a workload out there, we typically strive for our changes midweek or around Tuesday. As much as possible in our area. So that's a big differentiator for us.
Every company's different. Every
Yeah.
company has different things, and that's what makes it awesome. And that's also why I use the tool belt analogy, because you would take that same tool set and go to another hospital, and it may look, your problems may be a little bit different.
Oh yeah.
All right, COVID is the 5-letter word going around right now. How has that impacted your service management program? Is
Well,
it
I've gotten
impacted
a lot
much?
more gray hairs, I can tell you that.
I understand that. Plus,
Uh,
everybody's cooped up a little bit, right?
Yeah, yeah. Our biggest thing was around agility there, right? As we transitioned so many people, like everyone else, we transitioned so many people to work from home. Our immediate questions were, do we have capacity to handle this type of thing? And thankfully we did. The infrastructure teams did a great job of prepping, getting everything ready, making sure that everyone was aware of what was going on. But big changes in the change space, and one of the big pieces with that is we did have a big change freeze or slowdown, at least, to where we only
Frost.
pushed through pushed through very important changes during that time. We also, as that happened, saw our major incident count drop. So that's been another driver of saying, hey, we see the correlation here. Let's figure out how we can do better. Make sure we have better testing practices or whatever it may be.
Sorry, you saw me laugh on that because my
Yeah,
main thing, whenever I'm going somewhere, everybody thinks their changes do not cause incidents. And
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah,
hey guys, we have redundancy. We have redundancy everywhere. Even our vendors, we have SLAs to make sure they're redundant. There is a change to incident high correlation in the high
yeah.
90s%. And I've had these arguments. They're not really arguments. I'm an affable guy, but I'm like, guys, there's this correlation here.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's why you mentioned incident and major incident coming from change. And if anybody, all right, sorry to get on soapbox and now
No, it's
kick it
good.
back, but if anybody has an incident management problem, like they're seeing too many incidents, look at your change management
Yeah,
practice, process, whatever you want to call it. Look at that and say, what are we doing? Because most people do not want to call their changes as fail or successful
yeah,
with challenges or issues.
yeah,
Everybody just goes, check, mine's good. And so anyway, sorry, I'm
yeah.
off my soapbox. Let me kick it back
No,
to you.
no, that's good. And that's a big continual improvement thing that we're working on right now. How do we correlate our records better to help produce that data where we already know this stuff's happening, right? We see that it's happening. We've been able to theorize, hey, when we go on a freeze, look, we're doing great for the next week. But it's about creating that visual story for leadership to also now support the changes you want to make to try to remediate that, because again, that goes down to organizational change management. We got to evangelize these new things and processes and where we're doing bad and how do we do better. We can't just go in and say, hey, this person did wrong, let's mark them off, let's give them a bad X and let their manager deal with it. It's not going to happen. It's just something that until we understand the impacts these have down the road, we really have to just kind of present that story, and that's a big part of leadership, right? We got to know how to tell stories, so
And explain.
compelling ones.
The with them always comes into mind. What's in it for me?
Yes.
And you have to
Yeah.
answer that for every persona, every person you're talking to. You have to think, what's in it for them? And because if
Absolutely.
not, you're not going to have it. So our last question, this time's flown by, and I appreciate your time, Kenny.
Yeah.
If you had the resources, and so we understand your service management practices at Advent. If you had the resources, what would you attempt immediately? Just because you see, hey, there's value in this to the greater good. We could do, we could raise our level of maturity in other places. We could help save money. If you had the resources, what would you do immediately?
I would say, other than keep pushing our SACM program, it would be expand our SACM program into software asset management. That's one of our future focuses. We were really hoping to dive into that in 2021. This is another kind of effect COVID's had on us, to where we've been down a few folks in our service management office. In fact, we've had 0 folks on our SACM team for the last, I think, 3 months or 4 months. And the team has done an amazing job of stepping in and helping to fill those gaps in the meantime. But we know software asset management is something that we can easily figure out some ROI to help pay for that in return. So trying to build that program, I got shifted over when I was at Disney to the software asset management team. I understand the complexities that go along with that, but I also understand the value that comes out of it. So really big thing that we want to try to figure out. Right now, we're kind of managing that ad hoc between different teams. But having a centralized team that really is that team that you can go to talk about that, that's just such a big value add for an organization.
Oh yeah, and I have stories upon stories on those, just how people have done it. Well,
Yep.
Kenny, I thank you for your time, and I thank our listeners. Is there anything you want to send us off with?
No, just definitely want to thank my service management office team. I wouldn't be able to get any of this stuff done without them. So definitely appreciate everything they do every day for us and for the company as a whole. But that's about it for me. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for being with us, and thank you to our viewers. Thank you for being guinea pig number 2. And as we build this out, and hopefully it's a blessing, it's a value to our listeners. Have a great day, and thank you once again. Bye.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
And we'll be right back with Jeffrey's closing thoughts. And we're back with closing thoughts. We appreciate Kenny being on the podcast with us. He had great insight, great perspective. Advent Health is similar to a lot of hospitals who are trying to have their service management organization meet the needs of the business customer. And those needs of the business, they change over time. He mentioned all the biotech and the IoT. Think about how your organization can meet the needs of its business customers. And that Kenny brought up 2 things. If you're trying to do something new for our business customers in the world of service management, much of it would have to be around CMDB, make sure all the CIs are included. So it goes through our change, our incident, all this. Also, it goes through our asset management, where we can make sure that we know all that's out there. So security's involved with the onboarding, we have decommissioning. And so SACM processes, practices, heavily involved. The second piece, and I appreciate his answer of SAM, software asset management, as being the thing he would invest in. In my experience, there are many organizations who have invested 5, 6 headcount people, and they're reaping millions and millions in return just by gaining those efficiencies on their software licensing. That comes in a couple of ways: paying for what we're using and using what we're paying for. I know that sounds a little bit like Dr. Seuss, and I don't mean for it to be. All I mean is, let's make sure that we are licensed for all that we're using, so we don't have any software asset audits that we have to worry about. And let's make sure if we're using less that we pay less, and so that those two are in sync, and that we're proactively looking at our environmental ways to save money. In both of these areas, service management leadership can help your organization. And so reach out to me, and I'll be happy to have myself or one of the team help you out. And lastly, I want to thank my viewers. It's not really mine, it's Kat's, it's Kenny's, it's everyone in the future that's going to come on to this podcast. I want to thank our viewers, our listeners, for being a part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to serve the needs of those service management, those technology leaders, serve the needs of those people who are struggling, or maybe even looking for answers, looking for ways to do things differently or better. We're here for you. Even if you just want to contact me and call me and say, hey, what have you seen? That'd be great. I welcome it, and I welcome all feedback. I thank you once again. I hope you have a great, great day. Bye.